Let's see if this is working. Are we live? 2 secs, guys. Just gonna make sure this is all working good. Looks like we're working on YouTube. We're up on Twitch. Alright, brilliant, man. We're working. What is up, guys? Hope you're doing great. In this live stream, we're going to be breaking down all of the main card fights from UFC 278. I'm really sorry I haven't put out a video last week or this week. My microphone is basically broken, where after using it for a little while, after using it for like 30-40 minutes, the audio just becomes corrupted and the audio starts to sound like this shit, which is an absolute nightmare. So obviously my YouTube videos are like 2 hours long, sometimes an hour and 30 minutes, so I wouldn't be able to record a long video like that without the audio getting corrupted. But I'm hoping if I do a live stream that won't happen, but just bear in mind it might. So if the audio gets screwed up on this live stream and I have to cut it, I am really sorry. It's a fucking nightmare. I've ordered a new microphone, but it won't be here until Monday, so didn't have a mic for last week, didn't have one for this week either. So yeah, it's a fucking nightmare. But I've ordered a new mic, should be coming pretty soon. Be ready for the next one. And yeah, man, if the audio gets screwed up in this, I'm really sorry. There's nothing I can do to fix it. I just think my mic is fucking broken, which is annoying because I haven't really even had it that long, which is fucking irritating. I need to stop swearing as well. YouTube don't like the swearing, so I will stop the swearing. So yeah, can't put a breakdown out. Microphone's fucked. But I got a new one coming on Monday, and I'm hoping we'll be able to get through as many fights in this live stream as possible before this fucking mic dies again, because it's very irritating how it's doing that. So I've got a few things to go through about this week's event, some business stuff, giving you guys like an overview of this card so I don't end up repeating myself a lot on all of these fights. So I'm going to go through some stuff now. I've got my list, and then we'll jump into breaking down each of these matchups. So the first thing that I want to talk about is that this event is pretty bad for betting. I don't want to waste anybody's time. I need to let you guys know right now I don't have any bets on this main card. It's a very difficult event for betting, because what you've got on this main card is a lot of heavy favourites that should be heavy favourites. You guys know me, I am not opposed to betting big underdogs in MMA. I do it a lot. If we look at our results from last weekend, I bet on a lot of big underdogs last weekend. If we scroll down, we can see that I bet on Dominic Cruz, a big underdog, he lost. But then I bet on Nate Landwehr as a big underdog and he won. We bet on Priscilla Cachoeira as a big underdog, she won. We bet on Gerald Meerschaert as a big underdog, he won. We bet on Ontiveros, a big underdog, he lost. But then we bet on Tyson Nam as a big underdog and he won. So I bet on big underdogs in MMA a lot, as you can see from last week's performance. I bet on big underdogs most weeks, to be honest with you. But the problem with the big underdogs on this week's card is that even though, you know, Leon Edwards, Luke Rockhold, you know, Harry Hunsucker can win, anything can happen in MMA. In order for those guys to win their fights this weekend, they need to rely on their opponent making mistakes or their opponent underperforming. And those aren't the kind of big underdogs that I like to bet on. If you look at the big underdogs I've bet recently, guys like Ludwig Klein, Taylor Santos, you know, last weekend we had Nate Landwehr. These guys can win based on things that they can control, things that they can do, things that they are better than their opponents at. Those are the kind of big underdogs I like to bet on. I don't like to take long shot bets on underdogs who can only win if something crazy happens. So this main card, it isn't good for betting, but we'll still go on, you know, into a lot of depth on these fights and explain why. I'll also give my leans, my picks on each fight, and, you know, break it down in a lot of detail so you can kind of understand where I'm coming from. On top of that, we've also got, obviously, this event taking place at high altitude. So with the UFC since COVID doing so many events in Vegas at the Apex, the UFC events we've had for the most part over the last couple of years have taken place in a really sterile environment where essentially most fights have been taking place in a television studio in the Apex Center. And when the UFC have done events now in front of a live crowd, it's tended to be in like Florida, Texas, or the T-Mobile Center in Las Vegas, where, you know, the climate in air-conditioned arenas is pretty normal to what they, you know, fighters would have experienced in the Apex Center. But this pay-per-view card is taking place in Salt Lake City, which is, you know, a location in the United States that's quite high above sea level. So you get high altitude in Salt Lake City, which means this is likely to have a big impact on every fighter on this card. It doesn't matter if you've got a bad gas tank like Paulo Costa or an amazing gas tank like Kamaru Usman. The high altitude climate will affect all fighters, and what we're going to be doing in each of these breakdowns is describing to what degree it's likely to affect each individual fighter. And for the most part, it's very difficult to predict, but there are some things we can look at to give us some insight into how the altitude is going to affect each individual. So that's going to be a big part of this video as well. What I would also say about the high altitude climate is that it's another reason why this is a very difficult card for betting, because it adds another huge layer of unpredictable risk to this card, which is really, really difficult to work out. You don't know, you know, how badly each individual fighter is going to be affected. What else do we need to talk about? Also want to let you guys know that there are some live betting spaces available on my website at the moment to join our live betting group, and they don't come up very often. If you watch my videos, you'll never really hear me talk about live betting spaces being available, because live betting is pretty much sold out. But when people leave, you know, I let those spaces build up over the course of a few months, and then when we've got like 3 or 4 spaces available, obviously I let you guys know if they're available and how you can sign up. So live betting is how I earn my living. If you look at our results on live betting MMA over the last sort of 8 years, you can see pretty much non-stop consistent profit. So I do perform really well at live betting MMA. It's my speciality. So if you'd like to get in on this action, if you'd like to join the group, all you need to do is go to the homepage, MMABettingTips.com, link in the description below. You can scroll down, you can go to where it says in-play membership, learn more, and you can sign up there. Now, I don't want these spaces to go to waste. My live betting group is kind of like a restaurant, right? A restaurant can only serve so many tables in the night, right? Depending on how many tables are in the restaurant. Live betting is exactly the same. I can't have like an infinite number of people in the live betting group, because the more people that bet the same thing at the same time, the faster the odds get suspended and decline. So I've got a cap on the number of members in the live betting group so that everyone can still get bets in at decent odds. That's why I say spaces don't come up very often, because we make a profit pretty much every month, and as a result not many people leave. It's very rare that they leave. So a few spaces have come up now, so you can join, but I don't want these spaces to go to waste. So usually whenever spaces become available, they do sell very quick. If they don't sell for this event, I'm just going to give the spaces away for free until like they do sell. So if you do want to join live betting this week and you can't afford to sign up for it, send me an email, and then Saturday evening, like a couple of hours before the event, if the spaces haven't sold, I'm just going to give them away, because I'd rather people come into the group and take advantage of the bets that I share in the group, rather than these spaces to go to waste. So if you want to sign up, the spaces are there. They do tend to go pretty quick. If the spaces don't sell out, I'll do it on a first come first serve basis. So email me now and you might get in free. Like I say, it's not that likely they probably will sell, but I will do this every week now. You know what I mean? Every week that there's spaces available, I'll just give them away for free, because the way I look at it is, otherwise it's a total waste. We may as well maximize the amount of people in the group. So that's just the only kind of like businessy thing to get out of the way. So now let's get into the breakdowns for this card, and we're going to start off by, do you know what, actually what I think I'm going to do? I'm really worried that my microphone is going to break. So what I'm going to do, usually I would work through this fight in like a logical order, in like bout sequence, but I'm not going to do that. I'm actually going to do something different in case my microphone breaks midstream. I'm going to start with the fights that I think are most interesting from a betting point of view. We'll kind of jumble up the order that we talk about these fights. So the first fight that I'll break down, which I think is the most interesting fight on the card from a betting point of view, is going to be Dvalishvili against Jose Aldo. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Dvalishvili is the favourite at average odds of around 1.74, which is minus 135 for an implied probability of 57%. If we take a look at the odds on Jose Aldo, he's around an average of 2.15, which is plus 115 for an implied probability of 47%. So Dvalishvili is 31 years old, 5'6" with a 68-inch reach, and Jose Aldo, 35 years old, 5'7" with a 70-inch reach. So to the naked eye, there's no real notable X factors there. Both guys are roughly the same age, roughly the same size. 35 years old. It's not crazy old. It is getting up there in age for the lighter weight classes in the bantamweight division. But considering how long Aldo's been around competing at the highest level of the sport, 35, you'd think he'd be a lot older than that, although he is 36 next month. However, age is just a number, and it doesn't always tell us the full story about the stage in which a fighter's at in their career. So if you look at Dvalishvili, even though he's got an extensive background in combat sambo, he's only had 18 pro fights. Jose Aldo, on the other hand, has had 38 pro fights, so double the number of fights that Dvalishvili's had. And so we know over the last few years, Aldo's been on a pretty steep decline, nowhere near as good as he used to be, not capable of doing the same things that he used to be able to do. And so when you look at a guy like Aldo, I always use the analogy of cars, right? If you've got a 1-year-old car with 200,000 miles on the clock, or a 5-year-old car with 20,000 miles on the clock, the 5-year-old car, even though it's older, it's probably going to be more reliable than the 1-year-old car, because with only 20,000 miles on the clock, it hasn't had as much wear and tear on the engine and the components as the car that's 1-year-old that's had 200,000 miles on the clock. And that's kind of the case with Aldo. We've seen him take so much damage throughout his career. He's been in so many wars, he's put his body through so much, been through so many injuries, that he's naturally going to decline quite rapidly at this stage in his career. So both these guys are on opposite career trajectories. Aldo's getting worse and worse from fight to fight. Dvalishvili getting better and better from fight to fight. He's that young, hungry bull that's going to be making big improvements. And what is very interesting about this matchup, I actually need to bring up UFC stats, I completely forgot. What's very interesting about this matchup is that it's an extremely difficult stylistic matchup for Dvalishvili, because we know Jose Aldo is an absolutely elite striker. But what has made Jose Aldo such a high-level fighter and such a successful fighter throughout his career is that he probably has the best takedown defense I've ever seen. The guy's absolutely unbelievable. For the most part, for the vast majority of his career, for the longest time, he was pretty much impossible to take down and hold down, which is extremely impressive, considering he was competing in the lighter weight classes from very early on in his career in promotions like the WEC and then the UFC, which were divisions dominated by strong wrestlers. So it wasn't like Jose Aldo had this bulletproof takedown defense in a division which didn't really have that many strong grapplers. Like if you look at, say for example, the middleweight division, there's not really that many strong wrestlers in the middleweight division. So if you have amazing takedown defense in the middleweight division, it's kind of difficult to quantify how good that takedown defense is, because there's not many guys that can actually test your takedown defense. Aldo competing in the featherweight division, a whole different ball game. His entire career, he was facing strong wrestlers. Guys like Frankie Edgar, guys like Chad Mendes, even guys like Ricardo Lamas, or Mark Hominick, Manny Gamburian, Uriah Faber, Mike Brown. These were all strong wrestlers, and none of them could get near taking Aldo down and holding him down. And if you look at the statistics back this up. He's defended 90% of takedowns across 27 fights under the Zuffa banner. And I mean, look at the names in here, man. Look at the guys he's fought, the strong wrestlers that he's fought, the strong grapplers that he's fought. And yet, throughout his entire career, he was virtually impossible to take down. So stylistically, it's an extremely difficult matchup for Dvalishvili, because we know that his speciality is his grappling. And we know if the fight stays standing, Aldo's going to have a lot of success here, especially early on, because Dvalishvili is quite sloppy on the feet, quite bad defensively, and quite reckless. We saw him get dropped by Marlon Moraes and almost finished in his last fight, and we know Aldo just as dangerous as Marlon Moraes. So we often see Dvalishvili take a lot of damage on the feet, eat big shots, and put himself in a lot of danger. But we also know he's a tough fucker that can recover quickly, take a big shot, and weather the storm if he gets hurt. But the thing about Aldo is he's so fast, he's an absolute sniper, and he's definitely got that one-shot KO power that can just put you away. And it doesn't matter how tough Dvalishvili is, doesn't matter how good his gas tank is, doesn't matter how good his grappling is, none of that is going to matter if Aldo can knock him out early. So early in this fight, with how good Aldo's takedown defense is and how big his advantages are on the feet, I think he can cause Dvalishvili a lot of trouble. And I think Aldo's going to do really well in this fight early. Where this fight gets complicated is that Aldo is one of these guys that, like clockwork, slows down after about 7 or 8 minutes. Now, this is a very new thing. Obviously, Aldo's cardio was pretty good throughout his entire career, but at this stage in his career, he's obviously on a pretty steep decline. And he usually slows down, like I say, like clockwork, after about 7 or 8 minutes. So what this usually means in Aldo's fights is that he wins the first round, starts to slow a little bit in round 2, but still has enough gas in the tank to just edge round 2. And then in round 3, because he's very comfortable fighting tired because of his experience, and because he's very skilled everywhere, he kind of coasts in round 3, and then relies on himself doing enough in rounds 1 and 2 to win a decision that way. Where this fight gets really tricky for Aldo is that with it being at high altitude, he may gas, or not, gas isn't the right word. Aldo doesn't gas. He just slows down and becomes less effective. Just flatter, slower hand speed, his volume drops. With this fight being at high altitude in Salt Lake City, there's a real risk that instead of him slowing down around about the 7 or 8 minute mark, which still gives him enough to nick that second round, if at high altitude he now slows down after 5 or 6 minutes instead of 7 or 8 minutes, then there's a lot more time in that second round for Dvalishvili to outwork him. And even though Dvalishvili may struggle bad in round 1 because he's going to struggle to take Aldo down and hold him down when he's fresh, he's going to struggle to outstrike Aldo. If Aldo slows down after 5 or 6 minutes, that really opens the door for Dvalishvili to put in a good round 2 and a dominant round 3. I'm really, really confident that Aldo's going to win round 1, and I'm really, really confident that Dvalishvili's going to win round 3. That round 2 is the swing round, and if this fight were at sea level, I'd probably lean towards Aldo and go, do you know what? His takedown offense is going to hold up probably a good 7 or 8 minutes, and he's going to do so much damage on the feet that he's got enough in the tank to win the first 2 rounds against Dvalishvili. With this being at high altitude, my lean tips more towards Dvalishvili, and I think he's going to get it done, by taking over midway through that second round. Now, from a betting point of view, it's tricky though, because ultimately Dvalishvili is wild and reckless and sloppy on the feet, and we know Aldo's an absolute sniper on the feet. But what is interesting about this fight is that Aldo does slow down, but the rate at which he slows down is also determined by how hard you make him work. And we know that Dvalishvili is a guy that does fight at a very high pace. While he is sloppy and reckless on the feet, he still pushes a high pace, still forces you to engage, still throws a high volume of strikes. And what's interesting about that is that's the exact thing that you need to do in order to beat Aldo, because you need to make him work. If you just stand back, show him a ton of respect, and allow him to dictate the pace, his cardio is going to hold up a lot better, which is the reason why he did so well in a 5-rounder in his last fight against Rob Font. Right, Rob Font didn't make Aldo work super hard early, so Aldo's gas tank held up well. You're not going to get that with Dvalishvili. Dvalishvili's not going to respect Aldo. He's going to get in his face. He's going to force him to work hard early, which is exactly what he needs to do, because then Aldo's likely to slow down earlier into the fight. But the problem with that is that Aldo's not one of these guys that's just going to roll over and play dead. Aldo's one of those guys that will stand his ground and go out on his shield. So if you're forcing him to engage, he's not just going to allow you to dictate the pace and alpha him. He's going to stand his ground and fire back, which isn't ideal for Dvalishvili because of how bad he is defensively. It's kind of like poking the bear, right? Aldo might not be the bear that you want to poke because of how dangerous he is coming back at you with his counters. So it's a super interesting fight. Because it's at high altitude, like I say, I lean towards Dvalishvili. But Aldo's takedown defense and his striking is good enough to make this one interesting. So in the even money odds range, if you held a gun to my head, I would take Dvalishvili. But personally, I don't think there's a super strong position on either side here. So I'm going to be passing on this one. But let me know what you think. I'm going to catch up with the YouTube comments right now, see what we got. A nice one, Milligan. Really appreciate the kind words, mate. What's up, dude? What's up, RPG Jesus, mate? Hope you're doing good. Milligan saying birthday tomorrow, need 2 locks. Do you know what, mate? I wish you would have asked. I wish it was your birthday last week. I could have given you some good bets last week. You can see we did really well last week with betting. Hit 2 overs, which were very nice. Won a bunch of bets, but like I say, this week is so difficult from a betting point of view that I can't really. I mean, 2 locks this weekend. So difficult because we've got 13 fights, or actually 12 fights on this card now. Shayna Young, Miranda Mavericks cancelled. Out of those 12 fights, 7 of them feature heavy favourites, so it's just not really the card where you're going to get locks. What I will say is, man, I think if you wanted like a 2-leg parlay that has got a reasonably good chance of winning, I would go for Altamirano and Albazi. I think Albazi and Altamirano are probably 2 of the best bets this weekend. If you're going to parlay them together, obviously it's dangerous to bet big favourites in MMA. I never do it personally, but I think Albazi and Altamirano get it done a pretty high percentage of the time. But I won't be betting it myself. I don't think there's value there. I don't think they're particularly good bets. But if you really, really, really want to bet this weekend, I think Altamirano and Albazi, a parlay, those 2, probably the best way to go. Probably the best way to go, man. Wayne Mabson is saying Usman and Rockhold a good parlay. I don't think so, mate. I don't think so. But I'll go into those in a bit more detail. Joe, yo, my wifey is on the live stream. What's up, babe? She's in Ibiza with her friends at the moment. Obviously, I couldn't go to Ibiza because we got the UFC tomorrow night, but I'm flying out on Sunday to meet my girl in Ibiza. Can't wait. We've got no UFC next week, so looking forward to having some time off in the sun. But we'll have my son with me, so we won't be doing any like usual stuff you get in Ibiza, like the fucking partying and stuff. It'll be all family business, man. So Kovrik Christian, what do you think about Romanov Tybura? Yeah, we're gonna break down that fight in a minute, man. So let's get into the next one. That's Dvalishvili and Aldo done, and the microphone's still working good. So what fight should we do next? Now I know a lot of you are going to be interested in the big name fights like Usman, Edwards, Costa, Rockhold, but I'm going to break down Pudilova, Yan and Wu next because I'm concerned that my mic could break at any moment, and I think the Pudilova, Yan and Wu fight is one of the most interesting fights on the card from a betting point of view. So just in case my microphone does die, I think Usman, Costa, Pedro win. We'll get into the reasons why in more detail in just a little bit, but let's break down this interesting fight now between Pudilova and Yan and Wu. So if we start off by looking at the odds on this one, we can see that Lucy Pudilova is the favourite at average odds of around 1.83, which is going to be minus 120 for an implied probability of 55%. If we take a look at the odds on her opponent Yan and Wu, she is around an average of 2.0, which is plus 100 for an implied probability of 50%. Now, I was really happy to see that the UFC are bringing back Lucy Pudilova for her second stint in the UFC. She got released after going on a 4-fight losing streak back in 2020, which was really unfortunate because Pudilova always put on exciting fights. She was well-rounded, she was scrappy, she was tough. I enjoyed watching her. And I felt like even though they did release her, which is understandable after going on a 4-fight losing streak, when they released her, it was one of those situations where I felt bad for her because I felt personally there were much worse fighters in the division who may have not have been on a 4-fight losing streak, but that Lucy Pudilova was definitely capable of beating. So it's great to see the UFC giving her another chance, because she competes in the bantamweight division, and I feel the bantamweight division needs fresh blood at the moment. It's very, very light on talent, and Pudilova is a solid bantamweight and a good addition to this division. And just starting out here, I want to say that if this fight were at sea level, I would be betting Lucy Pudilova in this matchup, because I do believe she's better than Yanan Wu in every single aspect of MMA. I think Pudilova is a better striker. I think Pudilova is a better grappler as well. However, like we were saying at the beginning of this live stream, there's an element of risk to betting fights on this card, an additional element of risk that we wouldn't usually have by this event taking place in Salt Lake City, which is a high altitude climate. It's very difficult to anticipate how the high altitude climate will affect each individual fighter, but there are things that we can do to give us some clues as to what impact it'll have on each individual. And if we look at Lucy Pudilova's Instagram profile, we can see that one day ago she had this picture taken outside a building in Salt Lake City to show that she's arrived for her fight this weekend. But the tweet, the Instagram post just before that was from 1 week ago, thanking this clinic for her pre-fight UFC examination. If we go and take a look at where this clinic's located, we can see that it's a medical center in the Czech Republic, which is obviously where Lucy Pudilova lives. Now, this is really bad because we know that it's very difficult fighting at high altitude. It can be a big shock to the system, and it affects fighters even with great gas tanks, right? Remember when Cain Velasquez fought at Mexico City and it wreaked havoc on his gas tank, even though he's got a legendary gas tank? Pudilova does have a good gas tank, but it doesn't look like she's taken any measures to prepare for fighting at high altitude this weekend. So ultimately, it's going to be a shock to the system for everyone this weekend. But if you go out to Salt Lake City 2, 3, 4 weeks beforehand, you do give your body a little bit of extra time to climatize. It's not going to fully climatize, it's still going to affect you, but it won't be as big of a shock to the system. Lucy Pudilova is obviously showing up for the fight this weekend after not taking any steps to climatize towards that high altitude climate. So Pudilova could be a big victim this weekend, you know, and someone that high altitude affects in a really, really negative way. Now, obviously, Pudilova's preparation isn't ideal, but it shouldn't be that much of an issue unless Yanan Wu has made big preparations to prepare for fighting at high altitude. And if you look at Yanan Wu's Instagram profile, to the naked eye, it doesn't look like she has prepared, because if you just scroll through her recent posts, it shows you here, 3 days ago training at her regular gym, Jackson Wink MMA. A week ago, there's another post of her at Jackson Wink MMA. And, 2 weeks ago, Jackson Wink MMA. So it doesn't look like Yanan Wu went out to climatize at Salt Lake City either. But if we just go to the Googles, no, not my emails. If we go to Google and we look at Salt Lake City altitude, we can see that Salt Lake City is 1,288 meters above sea level. If we go to Albuquerque, we can see that Albuquerque is 1,619 meters above sea level. Why is this significant? Significant because Yanan Wu trains at Jackson Wink MMA. You can see the Jackson Wink logo there. In this picture, you can see the Jackson Wink logos all over the place. Jackson Wink MMA is located in Albuquerque, New Mexico, which is higher elevation than Salt Lake City. So even though Yanan Wu hasn't gone out to Salt Lake City to climatize, she doesn't need to, because she already lives and trains at high altitude, which I believe does give her a big edge in this fight, and it does close that skill gap considerably. Because ultimately, even though Lucy Pudilova is the better striker and grappler in this matchup, if she's too tired to demonstrate those advantages, it's not going to mean anything. So we can break this fight down from a technical point of view, but I think it could really hurt Pudilova this weekend that she hasn't prepared for the high altitude climate, and now she's going up against a fighter that lives and trains at high altitude. So in terms of striking, Pudilova's just a more technical striker. She moves better. She's better defensively. She throws at a higher volume, sits down harder on her punches. One of the big improvements that I've seen from Pudilova over the last 2 years since leaving the UFC or being released from the UFC in her first stint is that she's just much better defensively now. In her past fights, she would just stand in front of her opponents and play rock'em sock'em robots, but her footwork and movement is so much better these days. Yanan Wu just doesn't move as well, just doesn't read her opponents as well, isn't as sharp defensively. And I think the footwork, the movement is going to be the big difference here. In terms of grappling, the takedown defense and ground game of both girls is their biggest weakness. But Pudilova has made huge leaps forward in this department over the last sort of 2 years since we last saw her in the UFC. And now she's got really good reactive double leg takedowns and decent top control, which is something that she didn't have, back in her first stint in the UFC. And this gives her another big advantage over Yanan Wu. Doesn't have particularly good takedown defense, not particularly skilled on the ground, pretty weak off her back as well. So it's a really tricky fight, this, because like I say, if this was taking place at sea level, I'd be all over Pudilova here. I would be betting her for sure. But with the fact that it's at high altitude, doesn't look like she's really prepared for that. Yanan Wu has. Makes it very, very risky to bet on Lucy Pudilova this weekend. Pudilova is still my lean because she does have a pretty good gas tank, and I think her skill, level is a decent amount better than Yanan Wu, but it's too risky for me to bet this one. So I'm going to give this one a pass. So I hope you found that useful. Will be very interesting to see if high altitude does have a real big impact on these two this weekend. So I'm just going to catch up on the YouTube comments. Have we got any comments? Not really. Alright, let's get into the next one. So what fight should we break down next? What one's going to be the most interesting from a betting point of view? Probably I would say Costa versus Rockhold. Let's do this one. Alright. What's up, Kane? What's up, Kane, mate? Hope you're doing good, dude. What's up? Hope you're doing good, mate. Alright, let's get into this fight. Luke Rockhold against Paulo Costa. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Paulo Costa, pretty big favourite at average odds, are around 1.28, which is minus 357 for an implied probability of 78%. We take a look at the odds on Rockhold. He's around about an average of 3.80, which is going to be plus 280 for an implied probability of 26%. So Costa is 31 years old, 6'1" with a 72-inch reach. Rockhold, 37 years old, 6'3" with a 77-inch reach. So few X factors for us to dig into here. In fact, we're probably going to be talking more about the X factors and how these two guys match up stylistically. So I think the X factors are likely to have a big impact on how this one plays out. So we can start off by taking a look at the age. Paulo Costa, 31 years old, very, very young for a middleweight. We know that middleweight, the prime ages for middleweights like 35, 36 years old. So Costa at 31 has still got a lot of improving to do. And we've seen Costa make exponential improvements in a really short space of time in his mid-20s, from when he appeared on The Ultimate Fighter Brazil to making his UFC debut. So with Paulo Costa, not really being that active, only really fighting once a year over the last sort of 4 or 5 years, I think every time we see Costa, he's going to be making big improvements. He's going to be looking a lot better than he ever did before. And I think we're seeing that, man. When you look at how well his gas tank held up against Marvin Vettori, it was completely unexpected. So Costa's a guy that's definitely on that upward career trajectory. Whereas Rockhold, he's going to be 38 years old in a couple of months. And we know that this is a young man's game. Not only is Rockhold old, but he's had a lot of injuries. He's been knocked out a bunch of times. He's been in a lot of wars. He's taken a lot of damage. And whereas with a guy like Dominic Cruz last weekend, when we were breaking that fight down, the signs of Dominic Cruz's decline was a little bit more subtle, where, if you look at Dominic Cruz, he went pretty much his entire career without ever getting knocked out, wobbled or dropped. And then when we were breaking down the Dominic Cruz fight last weekend, we were saying the subtle sign of declining Cruz is that he was wobbled by Casey Kenny, dropped by Pedro Munoz, and knocked out by Henry Cejudo. So in his 3 fights leading into the Marlon Vera fight, he was showing signs that his chin was starting to go, and that wasn't an issue for him throughout his entire career. But that was quite a subtle sign that Cruz was starting to decline. Because, Cruz's gas tank was still good, he still moved well, his footwork was still great, his technique was still there. It was just the fact that he was getting wobbled and dropped a lot more at this stage in his career that was the clue that Cruz might not be the same guy that he was just a couple of years ago. Rockhold, on the other hand, has obviously been on a steep decline for a while now. He's looking slow, he's looking flat, and the biggest issue of all for Rockhold is that he's looking very chinny. Pretty easy to put this guy down now, very easy to drop him. His chin just doesn't hold up, even glancing shots are dropping this guy now, which is a big issue when you're facing a devastating power puncher, someone as dangerous as Paulo Costa on the feet. But there's more X factors for us to consider here, and they're not all good for Paulo Costa. If you look at the reach, Rockhold has got that 5-inch reach advantage over Costa, which, to be honest with you, I don't think is going to have much of an impact on this fight. Costa has got an abnormally short reach for the middleweight division, so he's used to fighting guys that have got a longer reach. He's given up a reach disadvantage to pretty much everyone that he faces. And Luke Rockhold is one of those guys that, at this stage in his career, I don't think he uses reach and length particularly well. He did earlier in his career, when he was a lot sharper and had better movement. But now that he's a bit slower, it's quite easy to get inside on him and land. He's talked a lot in his media interviews this week about being able to catch Costa as he comes in and how he's going to be able to use his length to chip away at Costa. But I'm not convinced. Rockhold has always been a volume striker. Never really had that much power in his hands. Never had that true legit one-shot KO power. And for the most part has had a kicks-based style of striking. So we know how aggressive Costa is. He likes to come forward, take control of the centre of the octagon, get inside and load up on big power shots. And I just don't see what Rockhold is going to be able to do to deter that, with him having a kick-based style of striking, with him fighting it with his hands down low, chin up high, being quite slow to react. I think Rockhold's a little bit delusional to think he can use his length and his reach to chip away at Costa from the outside. I just don't see that as being realistic. So I don't think the reach is going to have much of an impact on this. I don't think it's going to help Rockhold that much because of how aggressive Costa is at getting inside and how little Rockhold can do to stop that. Now, in terms of other X factors, we've spoken a lot already in this live stream about how the high altitude is likely to impact each individual matchup. And what I would say about this fight is that it's obviously a horrendous stylistic matchup for Rockhold. He's on a decline. He's getting old. He's looking very chinny these days. He's actually sounding a little bit shot this week, in his media interviews. He's not looking healthy. He's not looking in a good place right now, which is a recipe for disaster. And on top of that, he's fighting a young, hungry bull that just so happens to be one of the scariest guys in the division, one of the most dangerous guys in the division. So this is an all-round terrible fight for Rockhold, whichever way you dress it up. But what I will say is that the universe has thrown Rockhold a bone here, because if this fight were taking place at sea level, Rockhold would be in a world of trouble. The fact that this is at high altitude, though, gives Rockhold a window of opportunity to cause an upset. Because we know Paulo Costa is the kind of guy that slows down pretty quickly in fights. By the 4 or 5 minute mark, his mouth's usually open wide, he's usually breathing very heavily, and his volume usually drops quite a lot. Now, even though Costa slows down a lot after 4 or 5 minutes, he still carries big legit one-shot KO power. Costa's the kind of guy that even when he gets very, very tired, he still has big power and he can kill you with one shot. And with how chinny Rockhold is, Costa is going to possess the power to knock Rockhold out for however long this fight lasts, right? Even the final 20 seconds of round 3, if Costa's gassed out of his mind and can barely stand up, he can still deliver that knockout power to Rockhold's chin, with that combination of how dangerous he is and how chinny Rockhold is. So we've got to take that into consideration. But what is interesting is that Luke Rockhold is an absolutely elite grappler, as good as it gets when it comes to MMA grappling. In Rockhold's prime, going to the ground with this guy was a death sentence, and we've got to think about his lineage. He trained at American Kickboxing Academy for the vast majority of his career alongside guys like Daniel Cormier, Cain Velasquez, Khabib Nurmagomedov, Islam Makhachev. Rockhold is ultra legit on the ground. So while Rockhold has sounded shot in his media interviews this week and said a lot of crazy shit about his expectations of being able to use his length and catch Costa on the way in, I think Rockhold's talk about doing well on the feet, doing well with striking is delusional. But I think Rockhold is absolutely spot on when he talks about his advantages on the ground. We saw at the press conference yesterday Rockhold saying that if this fight goes to the ground, I'm going to murder you. And I completely agree with Rockhold. The skill gap on the ground is insanely big. And if Rockhold can get this fight to the ground, I think Costa is in a world of trouble. Because Costa is the kind of guy that will rapidly gas out and rapidly slow down if you can force him to grapple. If Rockhold can find a way to get this fight to the ground, it gets extremely interesting. Because he can accelerate the rate at which Costa tires out, inflict damage on the ground, and he can buy himself time. You know, so long as the fight's not on the feet, Rockhold's probably not going to be in any danger here. So it's a difficult and dangerous fight for Costa in the sense that he needs to treat the ground like lava. And if he slips and ends up on the ground, or if Rockhold can get a takedown, it completely flips this fight on its head. And even though Costa's still very dangerous when he gets tired, he will also become a lot easier to take down when he gets tired. And that's where the high altitude climate can have a big impact on this particular matchup. Because if it stays standing, Rockhold's screwed. You know, even if Costa is completely gassed out of his mind, Rockhold is still screwed. But what happens if Costa gets too tired to defend the takedowns? That's where this fight can get very interesting. Because if Costa usually starts to slow after 4 or 5 minutes at sea level, what happens if he slows down after 2 or 3 minutes at high altitude? Then Rockhold's only got to survive the first 2 or 3 minutes, and he may really be able to start to get his grappling game going then, which makes this a super interesting fight. So the way I look at this one from a betting point of view is that there's no way that you can bet Paulo Costa as a big favourite this weekend. It's just getting a very poor risk to reward ratio. It would be foolish to bet a big favourite like Costa when you know he's got a bad gas tank and you know that high altitude climates can wreak havoc on a guy like Costa, you know, someone with a bad gas tank. Especially risky to bet Costa when you know Rockhold's going to have a big advantage on the ground. But on the other side of the coin, I'm not interested in betting Rockhold either because he's chinny, he's on a steep decline, he sounded totally shot this week in his media day interviews. If the fight stays standing, Costa's going to give him hell. And we know it's pretty unlikely with how chinny Rockhold is that he's going to be able to survive for long enough to take Costa down anyway. But if you really do want to bet this fight, if you really want action on this fight to make watching it more interesting, I would definitely go Luke Rockhold. I think he gives you the better risk to reward ratio. There's just no upside in betting on Costa as a big favourite, even though he's a lot more likely to win. But I do think Rockhold is being given a bit of a he's been thrown a bone by the universe, man, and who knows, maybe he can find a way to get it done. Who knows, maybe. So anyway, hope you found that useful. I can't believe my microphone haven't died yet. My microphone's still holding up, man, which I'm very happy about because we've got through a good number of fights here. We'll do the Usman versus Edwards fight next. Obviously, Pedro Hunsucker is probably the least interesting from a betting point of view. Let me just catch up on the comments on YouTube. So 2K4 is saying, do you play poker? I don't, mate. I used to. Long time ago, I started out playing poker. Then when I had my son, you know what it's like. It's impossible to sit at a computer continuously for hours and hours on end. If you've got kids, it's just not possible. So when my son was born, I had to give poker up, and that's when I transitioned into sports betting. So now I bet a lot on football. I bet more on football these days than I do on MMA. Something that I started taking seriously at the beginning of the year. Doing pretty well with it, experimenting, just trying to get better every month, every week. So yeah, I'm betting football at the moment, or soccer, depending on what you call the sport in your country. MMA Jesus is saying Yan Wu is going to slam Pudilova to the mat. I'm not sure about that, man. I'm not sure about that. I do think Pudilova's grappling's improved a lot since we last saw her back in 2020. And Yan Wu's not a particularly good grappler anyway. Thomas Kane is saying NBA players feel the difference when it comes to high altitude. Yeah, what I can say is whenever the UFC have done events in Salt Lake City before, it's had an impact on fighters. Like, high altitude will definitely impact every single fighter this weekend. To what extent it's going to impact each individual, it's difficult to predict. But it's even going to affect guys like Kamaru Usman. It doesn't matter that Usman's a cardio machine. He will look flatter and sloppier than usual. It's just the way it is, man. It's had an impact on every UFC event they've ever done here. MMA Jesus is saying that Rockhold appears to be unhinged. Yeah, I got that vibe from him as well, Jesus, man. I definitely got that vibe from him. He doesn't seem in a good place at the moment from his media interviews. I agree with you there, mate. Thomas Kane says, sometimes when I'm on a fight... Yeah, definitely, mate. Gotta let the odds do the work for you. What do you think about Romanov? Do you know what? I think that it's a really easy stylistic matchup for Romanov, because Tybura's takedown offense isn't great, and Tybura is one of these guys that if you take him down, doesn't really know how to work his way back up to his feet. Tybura is really, really weak off his back. So even though Romanov slows down a lot as fights wear on, and the high altitude climate could wreak havoc on Romanov, with how easy Tybura is to take down and hold down, I don't think Romanov's going to have to exert that much energy to get those takedowns and hold Tybura down. So even if Romanov were to get really tired in this fight, I think he's still got a pretty good chance of taking Tybura down and holding him down. I think Romanov's issue is a lot of the time he comes out really aggressive and he exerts a lot of energy going for the kill on the ground with his ground and pound. Like even in his last fight against Jared Vandeira, just before he got the finish, he was looking a bit tired. He can't afford to make that mistake against Tybura, because if he does become too tired to take Tybura down, Tybura is the kind of guy that with his volume striking can punish him on the feet, especially with how sloppy Romanov is when it comes to striking. But it's very difficult for me to bet Tybura in this matchup with how weak he is off his back. He just kind of lies there and doesn't do anything. So I'm not going to be betting the fight this weekend. Romanov's too big of a favourite to trust him, considering he does slow down in the fights at high altitude. But just like with Costa, Costa's a bloody difficult stylistic matchup for Rockhold, and the same goes for Romanov. It's going to be a tough fight for Tybura. It's just a bit of a dead card for betting, man. Like, last week's card was great for betting. We did great, made profit on pretty much every type of bet. We did really good on last week's card. But this week's card, it's just very hard, man, because you've got 12 fights, 7 heavy favourites. Pretty much all the heavy favourites deserve to be the heavy favourites. So it's not like there's any interest in big underdogs. It's not like last week. We won bets last week on loads of big underdogs. We bet Nate Landwehr. We bet on Priscilla Cachoeira last week. This week's different. I do think the majority of these big favourites win this week. And then, the other fights outside of that, again, are very tricky for betting. Like we've already broken down Dvalishvili, Aldo, Pudilova, Wu. It's tricky, man. It's very, very tricky card for betting. But that's the way it goes sometimes. So now let's break down the main event between Leon Edwards and Kamaru Usman. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Kamaru Usman is the favourite at average odds of about 1.29, which is minus 345 for an implied probability of 78%. If we take a look at the odds on Leon Edwards, he's around an average of 3.80, which is going to be plus 280 for an implied probability of 26%. So Leon Edwards is 30 years old, 6'2", with a 74-inch reach, and Usman is 35 years old, 6 foot tall, with a 76-inch reach. So no major X factors there. Both guys about the same age and about the same size. So it's an interesting matchup, this. Obviously a classic striker versus grappler fight. But I think what's very interesting about this matchup is, for the most part, Leon Edwards' chances of winning this fight, I believe, are mostly out of his hands. I feel that Usman has all the skills in the world, everything he needs to win this fight and make it very easy for himself. But how easy this fight ends up being will be determined by what game plan and strategy Usman decides to use. Because if Usman comes into this fight with a grappling heavy game plan, I think it's going to be an easy night's work for him. Leon Edwards has been slowly improving his takedown defense and ground game over the years, but he's still one of these guys that, even though he is, reasonably difficult to take down, if you do take him down, very much like Marcin Tybura, he just doesn't know how to work his way back up to his feet. He's very, very weak off his back, very, very low level on the ground. And, training in Birmingham, in England, he's not really in the right place at the right gym where he's going to be making exponential improvements to his grappling in a short space of time. If we've seen Leon Edwards go back to train at AKA or go to train at Sanford MMA or go to train at ATT over the last few years, I'd be a lot more nervous about heavily leaning towards Usman in this fight, because Edwards is an athletic guy. He's got good balance, a good foundation to build a solid ground game on, but he isn't going to build that solid ground game in Birmingham. It's a harsh reality. Iron sharpens iron, and the coaches and training partners don't exist in England to develop the kind of takedown offense and ground game you're going to need to neutralize the threat of someone's grappling like Kamaru Usman. So Leon Edwards struggled with Usman's grappling the first time they fought, and if Usman comes in with a grappling heavy game plan in this fight, I think he's going to struggle again. But what we've seen from Kamaru Usman over the last few years is him coming into fights with more of a striking heavy game plan. Now, it's difficult to work out why he's done that. There are a few reasons. The first reason being the complacency is starting to creep in. We see this happen to a lot of dominant champions over the years, after they've, defended their title a few times, they've made a good amount of money, they've gone on a long winning streak, they haven't really been put in much danger in fights, they start to feel themselves, they start to get overconfident, they start to plateau, they start to take more risks, and they don't really respect their opponents as much as they should have done. If you look at Usman's last few fights, didn't really try to take Masvidal down, knocked him out, it's great. But at the end of the day, even though Usman's performance against Masvidal where he knocked him out was impressive, it's still taking a big risk, because the first time you fought Masvidal, you showed that you could take this guy down and dominate him on the ground easily. So why take the risk of standing and banging? Ultimately it only takes one shot to land and knock you out. And those two different game plans we saw from Usman in both Masvidal fights indicates to me that he's willing to take more risks now, which is a big mistake when you're facing guys like Leon Edwards that can land that, that one shot to put you away. Leon Edwards has got big knockout power, devastating head kicks. He's a sniper, fast hands, good combinations. So maybe complacency is starting to creep in with Usman, where he's feeling himself, he's feeling invincible, doesn't think anyone in the division's got anything for him, and he's going to go out there, showcase his skills, and look to put on, exciting fights as opposed to fight safe and win, which should be the most important thing. I've always wondered why fighters do this. It's never made much sense to me. When I see a guy like Israel Adesanya go out and outclass someone like Jared Cannonier, I absolutely love it. Izzy fought for 25 minutes against one of the most dangerous guys in the middleweight division, one of the best middleweights in the world, and completely neutralized everything that Cannonier tried to do. Cannonier didn't get near him in 25 minutes. I think we should put guys like Izzy on a pedestal and, throw praise at them for performances like that. I think it was a phenomenal performance, but then you go online and you've got all these knuckleheads criticizing Izzy for, putting in a boring fight, which makes no sense to me. We're not playing video games, we're not watching movies. This is a fucking sport. This is no joke. Winning is the most important thing. This is a results business. So Izzy's performance against Cannonier should be commended. But when you see the criticism, when you see the backlash that guys like Izzy face for being boring, you can see why that can have an influence on fighters like Kamaru Usman. We know that he had the nickname, for the longest time, Kamaru Snoozman, right? His fighting style was very boring. And so another reason why we could have seen him incorporate more striking into his recent game plans and strategies is that he's trying to boost his stock. He's trying to improve his profile. He's trying to become more popular, because the more popular you are, the more money you can earn. And putting on exciting fights is the fastest way to do that. So perhaps Usman, striking, standing and banging with guys like Colby, guys like Gilbert Burns, is his way to just try and become more popular in the sport and a bigger star, because he realizes that hugging guys against the clinch hugging guys against the cage in a clinch for 25 minutes isn't going to get him those tens of millions of dollars that he needs, to live the rest of his life like a king. So that's another reason. The third reason why Kamaru Usman could have started to, implement more striking heavy game plans in his matchups is because we know that for a long time now he's had 2 badly injured knees. Now, I'm a little bit skeptical as to whether this is the reason why he has started to strike more, just because Usman was talking about having 2 badly injured knees back when he was still implementing grappling heavy game plans in every fight. So it is possible that Usman's knees could have declined a lot, and that's why he's choosing to stand and strike more. But for me, the first 2 explanations are a lot more likely, because Usman starting to strike more coincided with his move from Sanford MMA to training with Trevor Whitman. And of course, we know Trevor Whitman's a predominantly striking-based coach. So when Usman was scheduled to fight Gilbert Burns, he didn't want to train at the same gym, Sanford MMA, with a guy he was scheduled to fight. So he moved to Trevor Whitman. And since then, we've started to see him stand and bang a lot more. So if Usman had gradually started to strike more in his fights, I'd say, perhaps that's a sign he's making adjustments because his knee injuries are preventing him from grappling hard like he used to. But the fact that there was a sudden shift where as soon as he went to train under Trevor Whitman, he immediately started to strike more, for me that says that the knee injury excuse is a little bit less likely. But for whatever reason, the point I'm trying to make in all of this is we don't know what game plan and strategy we're going to get from Kamaru Usman this weekend. And the game plan and strategy that we get from him will determine Leon Edwards' probability of winning. Now, if you look at his recent fights, he's used striking heavy game plans in his last 3. Then we had a grappling heavy game plan in his fight before that against Masvidal. And then we had a striking heavy game plan, a grappling heavy game plan against Masvidal here, striking heavy game plan against Colby here. So we can see from his last 5 fights that he's still willing to mix things up. And without knowing how much striking Usman's going to be looking to use, it's very difficult to feel confident on this one. If Usman comes in with a grappling heavy game plan, I do think he'll find it difficult to take Edwards down, but Edwards' takedown defense and ground game isn't good enough to neutralize the threat of Usman's grappling across 5 rounds. So while it's not going to be easy for Usman to get his grappling game going, eventually he will. Eventually he will get Edwards down, beat him up on the ground, wear him out, and it should be an easy night's work for Usman. If Usman gets complacent and thinks he can come into this fight and win a stand-up fight, I think he's going to be in a lot of trouble. Because while Usman has improved his striking exponentially, he's developed knockout power, he's got a great jab, one of Usman's biggest weaknesses is that he's still pretty bad defensively. We saw Colby grow into the fight in the second half of his last matchup. We saw Gilbert Burns drop Kamaru Usman. And for the most part, even though Usman got the late finish in the first Colby fight, that fight was pretty close, right? Razor close until, late on when Usman started to take over. Leon Edwards is a far better striker than Colby Covington, Gilbert Burns, and even Jorge Masvidal at this stage in his career. Leon Edwards is fast, he moves well, he's great defensively, throws a nice diverse range of attacks, big body kicks, you can see Cerrone feeling one of them there, big leg kicks, brilliant timing on his head kicks, no wind up, you don't see them coming, and we know the shots that knock you out are the ones you don't see coming. So from a betting point of view, it's a tricky fight for betting, because without knowing what game plan and strategy Usman's going to use this weekend, we can't really predict what's likely to happen with any degree of confidence. Like I've said, grappling heavy game plan, easy night's work for Usman. But if he chooses to fuck around and stand and strike, I think Usman could run into a lot of problems here against Edwards. So from a betting point of view, like I've said throughout this entire live stream, very difficult fight for betting. You don't want to bet Kamaru Usman in this because with him being a big favourite, just not getting a particularly good risk to reward ratio. You've got to put up so much money to get any kind of meaningful return. It's just not worth it, especially when you consider bad fight IQ, bad game plan and strategy has started to creep in his recent fights. I know he won, but at the end of the day, if he continues to try and stand and bang against these guys that are dangerous on the feet, eventually Usman's going to pay the price for it. And Edwards is definitely enough to make him pay the price if he tries to keep this fight standing. But at the same time, difficult to gamble on Leon Edwards as a big underdog here, because we know Edwards' takedown offense isn't great, his ground game's awful, and training in Birmingham in England, that's not going to be getting that much better anytime soon. And with how good of an MMA grappler Usman is, he can ragdoll Edwards here if he comes in with a grappling heavy game plan. So no strong positions on either side here. Very, very difficult fight for betting. And yeah, it's an easy pass for me. It's a sucky card for betting, but I do hope you find these breakdowns useful all the same for, you know, your prop bets, your over-unders, all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to catch up with the live betting. No, I'm not going to catch up with live betting. I just read someone talk about live betting, so my mind wandered. I'm feeling fucking hungry as well. We'll get to the last fight now, Tyson Pedro against Harry Hunsucker, in a bit. This fight's obviously dead for betting as well, but I'm just going to catch up on the YouTube comments. Obviously, after we're done breaking down Pedro Hunsucker, the live stream is going to be done, so if you do have anything you want to ask me, just drop a comment on YouTube, and drop a comment on YouTube and we'll get to it just before the stream ends. Hey, what's up, Rib Lemons? Hope you're doing good, mate. Hope you're all doing good, man. I hope you're doing good. Thomas Kane is saying, I think Usman's about to run from Kimaev and other hungry bulls like Rachmanov. Not saying Usman can't beat them, but he didn't want them fights. Yeah, they're both tough fights for Usman, right, man? Defo, mate. The real stud is saying Leon Edwards is going to get the win inside the distance. MMA Jesus is saying, yeah, Usman's basically saying Usman's time is up with Kimaev and Rachmanov on the come up. Cam L is saying, when has Usman showed bad fight IQ? So I think like a big part of making money from MMA is not focusing so much on like results, not in terms of your betting results, but a fighter's results. So not assessing fighters in terms of wins and losses, but instead thinking about the optimum way to approach each individual matchup and whether the fighter fought in the optimum way or not. And if they did, that's great. And if they didn't, even though they may still get the job done, if they continue to make that mistake and not fight in the optimum way, how it may cost them further down the line. So Kamel has asked, when has Usman showed bad fight IQ? I would argue that he's shown bad fight IQ in all three of his last fights. Now, if you're very results orientated, you'll be like, yo, I'm never listening to this guy again. I'm unsubscribing. This fucking guy from the UK is an idiot. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Usman's 20-1, former NCAA Division 3 level wrestler, elite athlete. What does this idiot from the UK know about MMA? How can he say Usman's got bad fight IQ when he's 20-1? And I get it. It's a results business. I've said myself in this live stream, it's a results business. But the question that I would put to you is, do you? So maybe we're not asking the right question. So Kamel's asked me, when have we ever seen Usman show bad fight IQ? I would throw the question back on you, and I would ask you the question: do you think Usman fought with the optimal game plan and strategy in his last three fights? Because we can debate fight IQ, and we can go back and forth and have different opinions on that. But I think we're all in agreement that Usman didn't fight with the optimum game plan in his last three fights. He got dropped early by Gilbert Burns, and even after being hurt very bad in that fight, chose to still stand and bang instead of, you know, trying to go to his grappling, tie Burns up, wear on him in the clinch, drag him to the ground. Against Jorge Masvidal, again, looked great on the feet, knocked Masvidal out. But was that the smartest approach when it only takes one shot to land to knock you out? And we've seen previously that Usman can completely neutralize Masvidal on the feet by just wearing on him in the clinch and taking him down. Was this the smartest game plan to use against Masvidal? He won. On paper, it's great, but was that the smartest approach? Was that the best game plan and strategy? And again, against Colby Covington, just basically stood in front of Colby, playing Rock'em Sock'em Robots for 5 rounds. Now, Colby's a little bit different, former NCAA Division 1 level wrestler, sorry. We know Colby's not going to be easy to take down and hold down. However, Colby had some success in that fight, and at no point did Usman try to mix things up. Didn't try and drive Colby into the clinch, wear on him, slow him down. Didn't try and steal rounds with takedowns. Just again stood and banged for 25 minutes. Was that the smartest thing for Usman to do? When Colby started to do well in the second half of the fight, could Usman have not switched things up a little bit, incorporated some grappling, looked to steal rounds with takedowns, looked to slow Colby down, or disrupt his momentum with some clinch work and takedown attempts? So look, if you're asking me the question, when has Usman ever shown bad fight IQ? I mean, fight IQ is a strong statement, right? It's a strong statement. If I come out and say Kamaru Usman's got bad fight IQ, that's a crazy thing to say. No one that is 20-1 and one of the greatest welterweights of all time is going to have bad fight IQ. But what I will say is I don't feel like he's used the optimal strategy and game plan to make the most of his strengths in his last 3 fights. And I think if he continues to do that, it's going to cost him at some point. And perhaps Leon Edwards is the guy that it costs him against, because Edwards is a far better striker than Colby, Masvidal, Burns, and that's all I'll say on that. It's worked for Usman up until this point, but everything works until it doesn't, and there are a lot of red flags for me in Usman's recent performances. So that's kind of how I would look at it, man. That's kind of how I would look at it. But let me know what you think. Let me know if you agree, man. MMA Jesus is saying, if you had to bet one of these guys, Lusa or Santos, dude, that is really hard. So I don't like either of those fights for betting. So what I'll do is just quickly explain those fights, right? So Jared Gordon is very chinny and very bad defensively. Gordon frequently gets rocked, dropped and wobbled in his fights. He's a tough fucker. Very, very tough. But Gordon gets dinged a lot. We know Santos is extremely dangerous on the feet. Vicious kicks, one-shot KO power. He's a nightmare. So Santos is the kind of guy that can knock Gordon out and cause him a lot of problems on the feet. The problem with Santos is that he does slow down very, very quickly. And with it being at high altitude, the altitude's going to wreak havoc on Santos' gas tank. So Santos is a live fucking underdog here because of how dangerous he is and how fragile Gordon is. And one of the things that makes this such a dangerous fight for Gordon is that there's no area that he can take this fight to alleviate the pressure he's likely to be under early, because Santos, when he's fresh, is a significantly better striker. He's light years better than Gordon on the feet. And we also know that Leonardo Santos has got great takedown offense, and he's an ultra high level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. So if Gordon's in trouble on the feet early, it's not like he can take Santos down to alleviate that pressure early. Gordon's got to survive for long enough for Santos to get tired before he'll start to have success in this fight. So Santos is live as fuck here. But the problem is, it's risky to bet him because he's got an awful gas tank and the fight's taking place at high altitude. But Santos is live as fuck. When you look at Ange Lusa, for me, I want what I'm about to say about Lusa to be a compliment to him, but I'm concerned that people may interpret it as being criticism, which I don't intend it to be. Ange Lusa is one of these very meat and potatoes fighters. When I look at Ange Lusa, I can't say he's particularly good at everything. Can't say he's particularly good at anything, but he's solid everywhere. Like when you look at Lusa, while I can't be that complimentary about anything that he does particularly well, I also can't be that critical of anything that he does particularly badly. Like he doesn't really have many weaknesses, which is quite rare in MMA. But with Lusa, when you look at how he matches up with AJ Fletcher, because he's quite middle of the road average everywhere. While he can probably hold his own to some extent against Fletcher everywhere, I don't see him having any big advantages over Fletcher. Whereas we know Fletcher is a really good offensive wrestler, really strong grappler. That's an edge he's going to have over Looser. So while Looser's takedown offense is pretty good, he's difficult to hold down, we know that Fletcher's still the better grappler. And because Looser's striking is just kind of average, does he have a big edge over Fletcher on the feet? Probably not. Probably a slight edge, nothing major. So Looser's one of those guys that will for sure be able to make this fight competitive. But can he go that extra step and get the win? I don't feel that confident in him. So Santos and Looser, for me, they're both risky. I mean, it's tough, man. Looser's probably going to win a higher percentage of the time, but with Santos being a bigger underdog, you might be getting a better risk to reward ratio on Santos. I don't know. I don't really know there, man. I'm not keen on betting either of these guys this weekend. So, the real stud is saying that Santos looked dead on the scales. Yeah, he does, man. He does. But he's a big guy, right? Big guy, 40 years old. And he usually looks pretty rough at the weigh-ins as well. What's up, MMA Locker Room? Good to see you, mate. Hope you're doing good, man. Hope you're doing good, dude. Hope you're doing good. MMA Locker Room as well, man. I saw your DM on Twitter, and I'm definitely going to get back to you, mate. I would love to do your podcast, mate. The reason why I didn't get back to you is because I don't know if you caught the beginning of the live stream. This microphone's basically broken right now. So I ordered a new one last week, and it just hasn't arrived yet. This mic just basically keeps fucking up where the audio gets corrupted. So I wouldn't want that to happen during the middle of your podcast. So I got a new microphone arriving on Monday, mate. And as soon as I'm back from Ibiza, I'm going to Ibiza next week just to chill out when we've got no UFC event. Have a little bit of fun over there. As soon as I get back, mate, I would love to do your podcast, mate. I really appreciate you reaching out, man. Can't wait to talk to you face to face in person. It's going to be great, man. Really appreciate it, dude. What's up, Parlons, mate? Parlons in my live betting group. Hopefully we can make some money tomorrow night, man. Fingers crossed. Been doing pretty good lately. 4 event winning streak. Hopefully we can make it 5 in a row for you tomorrow, man. Thomas Kane is saying, I think Usman's fight IQ is good. I say this because he manages his energy, never gasses or looks tired. Sometimes he should wrestle instead of strike, but his skill set allows him to do that. His fight IQ is managing his gas tank. More than likely, Aldo's training with Santos. I would do 2-leg parlay on Santos and Aldo. Ash, any thoughts on Perrin versus Keeling Ori? So I've still got 2 fights left to research on this card, and that is one of them. So I can't really talk about that fight, sorry, mate. I haven't researched this fight yet, and I haven't researched Woodson versus Saldana yet either. I'm going to be researching those fights tonight. So yeah, sorry about that, dude. So yeah, let's break down the final fight on this card. Now, Tyson Pedro, Harry Hunsucker. I suppose let's make this a quick one, because it is a bit dead from a betting point of view. Tyson Pedro is the biggest favourite on the card at average odds of around 1.13, which is going to be minus 769 for an implied probability of 89%. If we take a look at the odds on his opponent, Hunsucker, he's around an average of 6.50, which is going to be plus 550 for an implied probability of 15%. So Pedro is 30 years old, 6'3" with a 79-inch reach. Harry Hunsucker's 33 years old, 6'2" with a 75-inch reach. This is also going to be Hunsucker's first fight in the UFC at light heavyweight since moving down from heavyweight. But I don't think that's going to give him any kind of edge in this fight or have too much of an impact on this matchup. Because as we can see from the tail of the tape, both guys are, the same height, and Pedro's got the 4-inch reach advantage. So even though Hunsucker's coming down from heavyweight to light heavyweight, that's just because he was a big soft guy that, probably just fought at his walk around weight, and now he's actually maybe taking his career a little bit seriously and cutting some weight to get down to light heavyweight. But Pedro is the bigger man in there. Now, stylistically, this is obviously a very, very tough fight for Harry Hunsucker. Bad takedown offense, low level ground game, and we know that Tyson Pedro is a pretty strong offensive wrestler, Not the best defensively. We've seen guys like OSP, Mauricio Shogun Rua put Tyson Pedro in some pretty bad positions on the ground and cause him some trouble. But Hunsucker's not at the level of Shogun and OSP on the ground, so I think Pedro's going to have to worry about in this fight. So Pedro's going to have a big advantage if this fight goes to the ground. Now on the feet, Hunsucker is just sloppy, wild, reckless, bad defensively. Pedro looked absolutely phenomenal in his last fight against Ike Villanueva. In his past fights, to me, Pedro lacked confidence, just wasn't comfortable on the feet. But we can see between the fight against Shogun, the fight against Villanueva, Pedro was out for like 3 years, and when we saw him come back against Villanueva in his last fight, he looked like a completely different guy. Much more confident, moved better, used his length better, read his opponent better, and just looked like a much more complete fighter, much more confident striker. So even though Hunsucker will pose problems for Pedro on the feet, because Hunsucker is one of these guys that is very aggressive, very wild, very scrappy, and one of those guys that really does commit everything when he comes forward and attacks his opponents. He kind of just closes his eyes, comes forward, winging bombs, and at the end of the day it only takes one shot to land to knock a guy out, right? So Hunsucker's a big dude, covers distance quickly, loads up big time on his right hand. Perhaps he catches Pedro with something big and knocks him out. But if that doesn't happen, skill for skill, it's going to be very difficult for Hunsucker to compete with Pedro on the feet, because Pedro's by far the more technical striker, the more skilled striker, and he should be able to outclass Hunsucker. Now, the one area where this fight could get tricky for Pedro is that he has slowed down in the past. We've seen, Pedro slow down and struggle late on against Shogun in particular. He slowed down against Ilir Latifi, and with this fight being at high altitude, that could be a really big problem for Tyson Pedro. However, Harry Hunsucker doesn't look like he's in the best shape. I'm sure he's going to be in better shape now fighting at light heavyweight than carrying all that extra weight at heavyweight. But he's quite soft. He's a heavy guy. And Hunsucker's one of these dudes that doesn't have much experience, or in fact any experience going past round one. If you look at his record, every single one of his career fights has ended in round one. So we've got no idea how this guy is going to look if the fight goes into the second and third round. And what we notice a lot of the time with these guys that don't have a lot of experience going deep is that they usually have very bad gas tanks in the second and third round, because they haven't got that experience yet to learn how to pace themselves in rounds 2 and 3. So a really good recent example of this was Terence McKinney. McKinney is a guy that's used to just coming out the gate hard, killing everyone in 30 seconds. But then when he fought Drew Dober, and Dober was able to weather that early storm, we saw McKinney burn himself out and gas very quickly. So he just didn't have that experience pacing himself, because guys usually aren't able to hang in there very long with him. I'd imagine if this fight did go into the second and third round, while Pedro is likely to slow down because he's at a high altitude and he usually slows down at sea level, the probability is that Hunsucker will also slow down quite a lot due to his his lack of experience going past round one, and so that will negate the impact, or the negative impact of Pedro slowing down with this fight being a high altitude. So the odds reflect how this one's likely to go. Pedro should win very easily. Better than Hunsucker standing up and on the ground by some margin. Again, another dead fight from a betting point of view. You can't bet Pedro at these odds. Doesn't make any sense. MMA is a crazy sport. Anything can happen. Hunsucker's a big dude that hits hard. Maybe he catches Pedro with something big. But on the flip side, because Hunsucker is second best everywhere, I've got no interest in betting him as a big underdog either. It would be too speculative. So that's it, man. That's it for this live stream. Thank you all for watching. I'm chuffed that my fucking microphone was able to make it through this stream. So yeah, for the next UFC event, I'll have a new microphone. I'll be able to do the breakdown videos again instead of having to do these live streams, which I know aren't ideal because they're going to be longer and not as easy to listen to with me, going off on tangents and shit. So anyway, thanks a lot for watching, everyone. Just see if we got any last few YouTube comments. Doesn't look like we do, man. So yeah, thanks everyone for watching. Take care, everyone. Love you guys. Hope you all crush it this weekend. Have a great week off, man. We got no UFC next weekend, so enjoy it. because after next week it's like back to back to back then right through till November. So plenty of UFC events coming up for us to enjoy. Make the most of the time off. Have a great weekend, guys. Love you all. Take care. I'll see you all very soon. Nice one, guys.